Good. Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me. In preparing for today's talk, I was hit with post-traumatic stress disorder because the last time I did a presentation at a Bitcoin conference, the power went out while I was talking about load shedding. So for this time around, I'm just going to have 2 slides. So in case the power does go off, we'll be fine. But yeah, welcome everyone. It's really good to see you out there. And the topic of my talk is indeed the end of this is fine. And I'm going to, sorry, say again? Yes, the slides should be up. So let's see if we can display them. There we go, okay. So the end of this is fine is the topic of my talk. And my first slide is the next one. Not sure. There we go. Good. So this is fine. This is the little dog. It's sitting amongst the flames, saying this is fine. And the point, of course, is that really true? Are we still in a situation where we can say this is fine? And I would argue, no, it's not fine. There's so much stuff going on at the moment, so much to think about. And I think that the way that we've become used to living life is going to change quite dramatically in the next 5 years or so. We live in unsettling times, and we've got the US under Donald Trump shaking up the global order. We've got AI inserting itself into the economy and changing our lives at breathtaking pace. Commodities are running hot, and liquidity is pumping. So what is going on in the world? And I think the big picture of what's happening at the moment is that the world is currently being forced to shed some comfortable delusions and confront some hard truths. Among the most important is the delusion that talk is as good as action, and that if you just wish for something hard enough, you will get it. You visualize it, and you will manifest it, as some of the literature has it. Or in government language, you legislate for it, and it will happen. More specifically, if you want something to happen, you can just create the money and make it happen. But we're finding out now that this is not true. Turns out there's a lot that's wrong with this worldview. There are many things you can wish for that you're never going to get, and many outcomes that you as a government might wish to regulate for, but which you are not going to get. You can create money, but you cannot do so without trade-offs. And some of those trade-offs are what governments and also we are having to confront nowadays. I was having a conversation over lunch. I was saying, do you remember how people always used to say that when the government generates a lot of debt, we are borrowing from future generations, right? And that always sounds like something that's quite far off. But we are those future generations. So I think the bill for all of that borrowing of the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years, that bill is now we're being asked to pay that bill. And that explains a lot of the problems that we've got in the world. We're now at the end of an era where certainly in the West, it was marked by the idea that confrontation and head-to-head competition are bad for people, bad for countries, and bad for the world. And this was coming out of the devastating First and Second World War, so it was understandable that the appetite for even more conflict was limited. But it led to a situation where it became received wisdom that eternal peace and development can be obtained through regulation, through bureaucracy, and through global forums like the United Nations and the G20. The notion was that progress could be achieved through cooperation rather than confrontation, and that was quite an attractive proposition. But guess what? Cooperative equilibria can be disrupted. And Mike Tyson probably had the best way of explaining this. He said, everybody's got a plan until you punch them in the face. Yeah. And the world is currently in the phase of getting repeatedly punched in the face, mugged by reality, and it might be said by Donald Trump. So whatever his motives, Trump's aggression and brazenness have had the effect of rousing counterparts from their torpor, provoking a reaction, and in the best case, surfacing some hard facts about reality. And it's not just Donald Trump doing this. So geopolitical events in recent years have forced many countries to challenge their own beliefs. For example, if you're a sovereign state that holds some of its reserves overseas, guess what? They can be immobilized and made unusable, as Russia experienced after it invaded Ukraine in 2022. If you think that the US treasuries you hold are as good as gold, guess what? The US government's fiscal and monetary choices can reduce the real value of treasury claims through inflation. and they can also swing their market value through interest rates. If you think, as the US did, that the mighty greenback will let you buy anything you need anytime you need it, guess what? If a geopolitical rival like China is dominant in critical areas like rare earths processing and magnets, it can throttle your access to those resources if you don't play nicely, for example, through export controls and licensing. So now all these countries and many other countries in the world are adjusting to these realizations, and China is bulking up its gold reserves to reduce its exposure to the dollar, the value of which it is beginning to question. Russia will think twice about letting another country hold its reserves, and so will many other countries. And in Germany, there are now calls to repatriate over 1,200 tons of gold currently held on Germany's behalf by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. So Germany is talking about self-custody for gold. Isn't that interesting? The US is scrambling to reduce its vulnerabilities in rare earths and other critical minerals, and Europe is rearming and beginning to debate uncomfortable questions about regulation, competitiveness, and immigration. As all these changes play out, there's less trust in the world, I think, than there was 5 years ago, and less trust means higher transaction costs in economic terms. So the formation of trade blocs and trade barriers means lower benefits from specialization, the division of labor, and comparative advantage. So we're entering a world where it will be economically less efficient and costlier. We're not going to get the benefits of globalization the way we did for the past 20 years. And what do we get in exchange for the raising of these barriers? Well, on the upside, perhaps we get greater self-reliance and less exposure to the risks of dependency. We might also see a greater variety of governance approaches as countries feel pressed to deviate from the consensus to improve their own position. And think here of El Salvador as an example. It's not doing things the way normal countries do things. One very big downside is the risk of more repression and less freedom, which we're seeing, I think, as a global trend at the moment, and also the risk of more wars as countries seek to assert their dominance over their rivals. So I fear we are going to see more wars. Now throw AI into the mix and it gets even wilder. It seems likely that AI is going to be a critical factor in the competition between countries. All things being equal, countries that make it work for themselves will have faster growing economies and more powerful militaries than those that don't. The countries that control their own AI systems, including the physical infrastructure on which those systems run, will have more autonomy than those who don't. And countries that don't control their own AI resources will become dependent, forever at risk of having their access cut off. So think of South Africa's case. Let's say the government and businesses start using tools like ChatGPT or Claude or other tools that can be cut off. And imagine the state of dependency that a country can get to and the turmoil it would cause for that access to be cut off at some point. This is also why the US and China are both scrambling to control the entire AI value chain, from raw materials to chip manufacturing, from data center construction to creating the power supply to run the data centers. That explains a lot of what's going on at the moment. The sense of panicky urgency emanating from the White House is not without cause. But it also means that we should expect strategic considerations to be one of the drivers of low interest rates and the expansion of the money supply in the US. You can start see this beginning to happen already. So what does it mean for us as individuals? Well, I think we must expect enormous disruptions of our expectations and daily lives in the decade ahead, because nation states form the substrate on which we build our lives. And that substrate is now being shaken up. Many of the expectations of the role we play in the economy and in society are going to be overturned. It appears increasingly likely that AI will be able to perform many of the knowledge tasks we currently do. It may be that humanoid robots imbued with AI will be able to do the same for physical tasks. What role then remains for us as humans? What role will money play? If we are entering an age of material abundance, how will that abundance be distributed? And how will it be measured? With money, as it is now? So those are some of the questions I ask. Okay, so I think we are on the wrong presentation, unfortunately. But this is the next slide in any case. The end of this is fine. So My first claim was the end of this is fine, is playing out now, but maybe by the time it all ends, it's going to be fine. Let's hope for that. We shall see. So the crystal ball is cloudy, and it's hard to know how to prepare for this uncertain future. It holds enormous opportunities and also enormous risks, with no telling whether the outcome will be positive or negative on balance. And so we as individuals need to think about how we're going to deal with this. And as much as possible, I would say put yourself in a position where you can take care of yourself and your family, even in an environment that is certain to confront you with new challenges. And here are 4 practical things you can do. Start by ensuring that you are well informed. Keep up with developments, especially in AI, geopolitics, and global finance. These things are going to impact you. Secondly, diversify. Keep learning, improving your skills, and broadening your knowledge. If you have a narrow skill set, like if you only know finance, or only know law, or only know coding, this represents a point risk for replacement by AI. You can hedge that risk by having multiple skills. And in doing so, you should lean into AI. You have to learn to use it and leverage its power, but you have to avoid becoming dependent on it. Thirdly, keep it real. Recognize the value of authenticity in a world that is already starting to be deluged in AI-generated content. Realize that authentic human-to-human connections could be one of the most valuable assets that AI cannot replace. Fourthly, be mindful of the risks of being highly leveraged. So if you owe a lot of money, if you've borrowed a lot of money, if AI has a deflationary effect on asset values, as some expect, this can expose you to loss of collateral. Imagine if you borrowed R1 million against a R2 million house, and the value of your house drops to 500,000. The bank comes knocking and says, pay back the money. Then you've got a problem. If your income drops because you lose your job to AI, you could also find it hard to keep up with your debt repayments. And that now brings me to Bitcoin. So it may be that we're entering an era of disruption that places in question the very notion of money. But if money survives, then there's a good chance that Bitcoin will occupy a central role in that system. It is well set up to retain its value and appreciate. And that is because the energy that must be spent to create and maintain Bitcoin creates a direct link to hard physical reality. At present, there's no way of faking that. You've got to spend the energy to create the Bitcoin. And that creates an anchor of truth in a world of uncertainty. This feature plus its programmed scarcity mean that it can serve as a reliable, mutually intelligible representation of value. And that ultimately is what money is. This view is beginning to be more widely adopted, as shown by the more widespread institutional adoption of Bitcoin by mainstream financial and investment institutions, especially in the US. And I just saw an interview earlier today. A potential next chairman of the US Fed, Kevin Warsh, was in an interview, and he said, Bitcoin could provide market discipline. It could tell the world that things need to be fixed. Bitcoin does not make me nervous. It's just the newest, coolest software that will provide us with the ability to do things that we could never have done before. So you're seeing this institutional adoption and trust in Bitcoin, I think, beginning to assert itself. That now brings me to South Africa. And in my view, South Africa is a very interesting market globally. It's performing well below its potential, but unlocking that potential is far easier in South Africa than it would be in many other countries in the world. So let's look at our starting position. South Africa is blessed with innumerable advantages. It has a long coastline, a benign climate, a large mineral endowment, plentiful energy resources from petrochemicals to solar. It's geologically stable and free of volcanoes and earthquakes, hurricanes and tornadoes. It is blessed with extraordinary natural beauty, as you can see when you look out the window. It has a well-developed infrastructure, a highly advanced agriculture sector, strong linkages to global markets, uses English as its main language, and it also has a highly innovative and stress-tested private sector, as Russell was describing earlier. But more importantly, it also has a very strongly rooted social preference for freedom, born out of experiences like the liberation struggle against apartheid, and before that, the fight of the Boers against the British. I'm always reminded of a section in Deneys Reitz' book, Commando, where he describes the efforts of the Boers to organize an army and how impossible it was to do because the men were so individualistic and resistant to doing what they were told. And that spirit, I think, remains strong in South Africa. So there's a healthy distrust of authority, and that's a feature of living in this country. The word liberty comes from the Latin word liber, which means free. And that is also the common root of words like liberalism and libertarianism. My organization, that is the Institute of Race Relations, is a classically liberal policy think tank, founded in 1929, so almost 100 years old. Our mission is to promote individual freedom, market freedom, and non-racialism. And this is also where the key for unlocking South Africa's prosperity lies. It lies in removing many of the restrictions that currently inhibit economic freedom, like government threats to property rights and the freedom to make hiring and procurement decisions on a commercial basis. And that is a large part of the work that we do at the IRR. Ultimately, the most powerful force that shapes our world is ideas, and our mission is to make good ideas stronger in the world. One of the best ideas is that of sound money and of controlling your own property, and that is what Bitcoin allows you to do. And many South Africans support us in this mission, and we invite you to join them. So thank you very much.